Good morning and welcome to Laketon Bethel. My name is Sherwin Branson and I'm coming to you from the Church of the Dirt near Park City, Utah. I'm up here visiting my son, Joe, and just wanted to make one of these crosstalks from an unusual location. And I have to say that this is one of the most unusual locations that I've ever made one of these presentations from. It's a very interesting place. It's kind of windy. I hope the wind doesn't affect the sound quality too much. And what I've done is I've had to hike up here. It's quite a hike. The air is thin. I'm puffing, but it's a good location. You can see the mountains behind me. It's really quite interesting place. And it's good to be with you, even though I'm doing this quite remotely. I am about, I would say, 1,500 and some miles from Muskegon right now. Today I want to talk about the priesthood, more specifically the Protestant doctrine of the priesthood of all believers. Now I want to ask you a question to start off with. And there's going to be some bicycle traffic going through here, so we'll just say hi and be friendly to all those folks. But here's the question that I wanted to ask you today, and I don't have a pulpit, so I'm going to have to hold my notes, because you know me, if I don't have notes, I tend to ramble. But here's the question. What if an angel would descend on you? Suppose you're hiking in those mountains behind me, and you're by yourself, and an angel comes down and talks to you and says, you know what, God sent me to tell you that you need to become a priest. How would that go for you? Or suppose you're more locally. You're walking along the beach of Lake Michigan by yourself. You're meditating. You're thinking God thoughts. And an angel comes down, scares you to death almost. And while you're there, well, you just have this conversation with an angel. And the angel says to you, I need you to become a priest. What are you going to do? How are you going to react to that? You might think, well, if you're a woman, you're exempt from that, because everybody knows the Catholic Church doesn't have female priests. But the Episcopal Church does. What if God said to you, ma'am, that you are called to be a priest? What are you going to do about it? Now, men, if you're going into the Catholic priesthood, there's a little catch, and that is you're called to be celibate. No more girls, no more women, no more marriage. What are you? Hello. That's what you're called to do. So, you have to be celibate completely. A couple of bikers and a dog just rode by. Kind of cool. Where did this idea of being a priest, of having priests, come from? What in the world was the church thinking when we started this whole tradition of priests? Well, it's an interesting history. You know, the Jews had priests who offered sacrifices to the temple in Jerusalem. And they did that for many, many years. And that went on until AD 70. When the Romans destroyed the temple, there were no more animal sacrifices. So the Jewish priesthood essentially came to an end at that time. And then priests, Christian priests, emerged around the year 200 AD. Some of the Jewish priests left their kind of heritage. The early Christians, a lot of them came out of Judaism, and so they just felt more comfortable with priests. They wanted professional clergy, and so they got them. The Catholic Church, in the year AD 1074, required celibacy. So that means for the first 800 years of the priesthood, you didn't have to be celibate. Now, this whole celibacy thing I can't agree with. I could never be a Catholic priest because I greatly prefer not being celibate. Now, you may have noticed my unusual outfit today. I'm wearing the priestly collar, the Roman collar, and it's a tradition of the Catholic Church, and I did some research on that too. And it seems that these collars are only about 200 years old. And priests and pastors started wearing them for the same reason we have black and white cop cars. You know, we have black and white cop cars because people need to recognize who the police are. In the days 200 years ago, people wanted to recognize who the clergy were. So they started wearing these. And it's not just Catholic, Reformed, Presbyterian, Lutheran, Methodist. Lots of pastors wore these. Reformed pastors wore them in my lifetime, primarily on the East Coast. Now, they largely stopped wearing them due to the scandals of the last 25 years. I bought one, and in my early days, I would wear one whenever I went to make hospital calls, particularly in a Catholic hospital, because then they knew who I was. I could get in easier, I could get around easier, and people were very friendly to me. One time I went to a Rolling Stones concert in Ames, Iowa, at the Iowa State University, and I thought just for fun I would wear one of these collars to the Rolling Stones concert. Well, as you can imagine, I got lots of attention for wearing this thing. And it was quite comical. I could tell you stories for hours about what happened at that Stones concert. But the fact is that anyone can get one of these collars. You don't need a special license. You don't need proof of ordination to get one. You can get them in multiple colors. I've seen them in lavender. I've seen them in lime green. I've seen them all different kinds of colors. And you can order them from Amazon. So anyone can get one. If you want to get one, go for it. I bought this one at Hage's bookstore years ago. Now, as Protestants, we generally don't believe in the priesthood. One of the principles of the Reformation was the priesthood of all believers, the function of the priest ideally. And get this, this is the purpose of a priest, is to connect people with God. So as Christian believers, as the priesthood of all believers, our job is to help connect people with Jesus. And that's not just for clergy, that's for everyone. That's the function of all believers, ideally, to connect people with Jesus. So if you commit to Jesus, you are a functional priest. That means that all of you are priests. Now, the biblical background for this is found primarily in one of the letters that Peter wrote. It's found in 1 Peter 2. So let's take a look at that. This is what he says, and this is from the Message paraphrase. But you are the ones chosen by God, chosen for the high calling of priestly work, chosen to be holy people, God's instruments to do his work and speak out for him, to tell others of the night and day difference he made for you, from nothing to something, from rejected to accepted. See, the fact that you know Jesus means that you're chosen by God. He picked you to be his representative. You know that benediction that I do every Sunday, where it says, and now in whatever you do or say, let it be as a representative of the Lord Jesus, all the while giving thanks through him to God the Father. It's from Colossians 3:17. You're called to be his representative. And that's the real work of the priesthood. To represent Jesus to people, to help them connect with him. You're his instrument to do his work. That means we do the work of things like hand to hand and feeding kids and introducing kids to Jesus, letting the kids in the neighborhood know that Jesus loves them. We're here to speak out for Jesus, to tell others of the difference he makes in our lives, how putting him first makes everything in life better. We're to tell them how he took us from nothing to something, how he's constantly working on us, constantly trying to improve us, constantly making our lives better. He does that for me, and I know he'll do it for you too. He took you from being rejected to accepted. You can now live knowing that the creator of the universe, the creator of these mountains behind me, the creator of sunrises and sunsets, all these things, that creator loves you more than you can possibly love your own children. He took you from rejected to accepted. So you are his real priests. All of you who are listening to my voice are called to this. Peter goes on with instructions for this new priesthood. He says this, friends, this world is not your home, so don't make yourselves too cozy in it. Don't indulge your ego at the expense of your soul. Live an exemplary life in your neighborhood so that your actions will refute their prejudices. Then they'll be won over to God's side and be there to join in the celebration when he arrives. So don't be like everyone else, living only for themselves. Don't indulge your ego at the expense of your soul. Don't be so self-centered that all you think about is what you're getting out of it. Don't be like the guy who just lives for what means something to him. Forget about that. Don't indulge your ego, but rather move on. Be a servant. Stop trying to be important. Instead of trying to make a name for yourself all the time, see how much of a servant you can be. Live your life in such a way that people in your neighborhood trust you. Let your actions refute the common prejudice against Christians so that your neighbors can be won over to God's side, as Peter says. What this means, folks, is that we all need to clean up our act. We need to stop being a jerk. That means no gossip, no slander, no put-downs of anyone ever, even no put-downs of politicians. Live generously within your means. Live generously with your words. Say complimentary things. Be loyal to your spouse and your family. Be loyal to your friends. It's all about building trust. Keep your word. Make a commitment and keep it, and trust will grow. Pay attention to the little things that you do that define you, like simply putting your shopping cart back in the rack. Pay your taxes without cheating on them, and help out where you can. Folks, the prejudice against Christians is probably the highest it's ever been since the times of the Roman Empire. You know, some of the accusations against the early Christians were awful. The early Christians were accused of being cannibals because they said things like, they'd get together to celebrate the Lord's Supper, and they'd say, "This is my body broken for you. As often as you eat of it, do so in remembrance of me." And, well, when people who were not Christians heard that, they assumed they were cannibals. Rumors circulated that the Christians would kidnap pagans and fatten them up and eat them. They called their Sunday evening gatherings love feasts, where it's kind of like a major potluck where they got together and read through the Gospels and talked about Jesus. Well, they were called love feasts, and of course some of the pagans interpreted that as orgies. And the early Christians were regarded as atheists, believe it or not, because they wouldn't go into the pagan temples and worship the pagan gods. So, since their God was invisible, they were thought of as being atheists. Now, the first generation of Christians had an awful reputation. But they changed that, and we can change it just as they did. And it's very simple. They simply loved everyone. They took care of hungry kids. They fed them. They saw an orphan on the street. There was no foster system in those days. They saw orphans on the street. They adopted them. They took them into their homes. They gave them their names. they earned this reputation of being the good guys in the community. They bought slaves and emancipated them. And so then Christianity spread like wildfire and kept spreading. And then they started ordaining priests. That's when the church became a powerful corporation rather than a group of folks who are called to serve. We need to get back to our roots. That means that you and I need to be real priests. Peter described the results he wanted to see. He wanted to see our neighbors won over to God's side. We need to live our lives in such a way that those not connected to Jesus will want to be us. And we can do it. We must do it. Let's do it. So this is Sherwin Branson, pastor of Laketon Bethel in Muskegon, in a very unusual location, the Church of the Dirt. There's bicycles going by, people hiking with their dogs. Hope it's not too distracting. I hope you got the message that we're called to all be priests. Church of Dirt. And as always, thanks for listening.